I think any entrepreneur going through like starting a business has these different layers. Like you start peeling back the onion, right? And you're realizing that like that's an opportunity. And so one of the things that I realized early on was that you had this hyper fragmented space, right? So like small law, if you will. So take out all of like the white shoe firms, the big names that people think of. Most of the law firms out there are small law firms, right? With the average size being, call it 1 to 2 attorneys. And what I realized is that like you had 1 to 2 attorney firms working on a variety of different systems, putting data into those systems in a very different manner. So there was no data integrity within the industry. Like this was at the time when like case management systems, or for people outside the law, CRM systems were really just coming into popularity, right? And so what I realized was like none of these firms had information that could be shared in an easy to digest way, and they had no incentive to share that information, right? So that was one of the things that appealed to us. The other thing that appealed to me was like it's a hyper regulated space. Right. So in the US, non-lawyers can't own law firms. And so, well, historically, that was the case. That has changed to some degree, but that didn't make sense to me either. And, in this ever evolving world, one of the predictions we had early on, and it's starting to come to fruition, was that non-lawyers would be able to own law firms. And thought that, in building a business that was premised on analytics and technology, that we could position ourselves as the perfect conduit to allow outsiders in that want to build really cool products that help the end consumer.
That makes a lot of sense. That's interesting. That's a counterintuitive foresight that is starting to come to fruition, like you said. I guess sort of following on that, why grow? Why build to the scale that you have? So many law firms like, oh, I'm happy with my getting 50 clients per month or whatever it might be. But it sounds like you had a vision for something much larger and you've built something much larger. Why did you decide to take that path? And then curious, what difficulties have you had to overcome along the way to get to the next stages of growth?
It's funny. I yell at myself sometimes. We've been at this for 12 years now, and we're constantly reinvesting the money back into growing. And I'd be a liar if I said there weren't days where I was like, why don't you just like let this thing become profitable, scale it back a little bit, and just like chill. That's just not my personality. I mean, maybe that'll change at some point, but like, at 45 years old, it's like if I'm not going to like hustle and like try and grow, like when, right? And so, so I think part of my DNA, as far as hurdles, I don't think you get to 12 years of building a business without hurdles. There have been plenty, everything from financing. This industry is super interesting in that because non-lawyers can't own law firms, traditional avenues of capital aren't open to us, right? If non-lawyers can't own law firms, you can't raise a traditional equity round. So I joke with people, they're like, I had to raise money via debt, and imagine going to somebody on day one of your business and saying, hi, I'm Todd. I have this idea. Will you lend me money? Right. It's not exactly the most like compelling sales pitch in the world. So we had to navigate that. And then the other thing I think that we had to navigate, which is not unique, but I do think entrepreneurs underplay this, people. Right? In a growing entity, you've got all these different skill sets and different people. And I think one of the bigger challenges I found is that like you go from day one where I wore every hat. I quite literally answered the phone, right? I have a technical co-founder, right? Who's fantastic, who handled the tech side of the house. But like the two of us had our hands on everything, right? And you slowly go from taking your hands off the wheel and hiring subject matter experts in all of these different areas that you don't have expertise. And you've got to become comfortable with that. And you've got to learn to manage people that you're not subject matter expert on, right? And I think that's hard. But it's also one of the things that I've found extraordinarily gratifying, right? Because you get to learn about all these different areas.
That seems to be like a scary place for a lot of entrepreneurs, letting go of the reins and handing over control. Like when you're picking up the phone, like you are Lawfty, right? Customers talk to you. And then all of a sudden you're in this position where you got to train other people to be essentially the face of the brand. I guess, how did you navigate that?
Anything to back this up other than intuition. But like, I bet that like if you did a study on like why most businesses don't grow, it's because people are unwilling to give up the reins. I mean, I can't tell you how many law firms I've talked to or how many entrepreneurs are, oh, I can't teach somebody to do that. I just have a very particular way of doing it, and I can't do that. Right. And then like my comment to them often is like, have you seen the size of Amazon? right? Like I promise you that you could teach somebody to manage your calendar, right? Or whatever that like minute task is. I think people are very hesitant to do it because it's uncomfortable and it requires you to do something you're not used to.
Do you think there's like a perfectionism element to it as well? What this is maybe me projecting, because I've had to go through that a little bit sometimes too. But I'm wondering if it's also a perfectionism where I take client interactions as an example, right? You hire someone to then take you out of the client interactions. Do you think there's an element of, I can only do it this way, I can't teach it, and this is my perfect way. And if I bring in someone else, they might make a mistake and I'm not willing to even have that mistake be made? Like, do you think there's an element of...
Yeah, for sure. I think it's both perfectionism and risk aversion. But like, I do think most people are risk averse. And I do think lawyers in particular are risk averse. And so I think like the fear of something going wrong, right? Is that client getting angry? Is that representation going sideways? Like that risk, and there is risk, right? Prevents people from going forward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Everyone's got to go through that to grow though. I've seen that, and not just law firms, but businesses in general. So that makes sense. Just curious, along the path of growth, like what key decision or strategy do you think that you made that most contributed to your growth or accelerated your growth over the years?
I think there were two things. And so one is an interesting piece of the backstory is, so I mentioned earlier that I got sort of like intrigued by this idea of the referral fee early on. That was like my first year practicing law. I didn't actually launch this business until year 6 of practicing law. And so I looked at this business idea in year 1, and I had a wealthy buddy from college that said that, you know, he would back the business if I was able to figure out how to do it. And I was looking at it from the perspective of TV, billboard, and radio. And the conclusion I came to after doing my research was like the big players were just too big. Like there was no way to break in with any reasonable amount of money on TV, billboard, and radio and make a dent. And so I put the idea down. Right, did my research and just it didn't seem practical. Fast forward, and I met my co-founder, who's a computer science guy, and we just got to sort of prototyping and brainstorming on ideas. We met every Saturday at a WeWork in Lower Manhattan while we both had full-time jobs, just tinkering around with things, working on that deposition idea I mentioned, working on our current business model. And the aha moment was it's digital. It's like, you know, two guys that knew absolutely nothing about Google Ads. This is 2012 now, put up an ad in Manhattan, which is supposedly the most competitive market in the world, right? And the phone started ringing. That was realization number 1. Aha moment number 2 was as the phone started ringing, and mind you, I was answering every call for the first year and a half. And one of the insights we had was that like the general public doesn't understand that there's a difference between attorneys, right? And so like you have all these attorneys that are online and they're like, oh, I'm the best truck accident lawyer. Right? I'm the best whatever lawyer. And like what you realize is like the folks that are calling, they don't know that there's a difference between a personal injury lawyer, a bankruptcy lawyer, an immigration lawyer, a criminal lawyer, a lawyer's a lawyer. And so we just started, all these people were bidding on these like super hyper competitive keywords. And we just put up ads for lawyer and the phone started ringing. We set up processes to navigate that. And it worked really, really well. You know, Google since changed things and the strategies have changed and they've gotten more sophisticated. But I think like that realization layered into where Google was at the time of their sort of, you know, trajectory, it just worked really, really well.
That's amazing. One, just like channel insight on digital, that makes sense. But the customer empathy to recognize like the asymmetry of knowledge between a consumer layperson and a lawyer. Like I feel like most lawyers don't get to that insight. Like it's like everyone's out there asking like, you know, do you have a dog bite case? And I'm like, I don't even know what a dog bite case. Like, what are you talking about? Like I was looking for a lawyer. I was looking for help. Like
that's exactly right. Oh, and then you get into the nuance of like the difference between workman's compensation and a personal injury claim or Social Security. Like people don't know that. And then you think about the math, right? In the United States, there's 300 million people and 1 million lawyers. Just a lot of people don't know lawyers.